En Argentina existen 2.000 empresas habilitadas para comercializar insumos para el agro. Más de la mitad operan en AgriRed, el único mercado B2B donde las mejores compañías del sector compran y venden insumos en forma ágil y eficiente, en donde ya se concretaron más de 4.000 operaciones y en un monto que supera los 150 millones de dólares. El campo cambió y multiplicó su rendimiento. El mercado de insumos también cambió y ahora se llama AgriRed.
Somos APRESID Internacional. Llevamos la misión de APRESID a distintos rincones del mundo, promoviendo la producción sustentable de alimentos, fibras y energía. Estamos a la vanguardia de posibles soluciones para mitigar el cambio climático al promover un modelo de agricultura basado en el sistema de siembra directa que conserva y regenera. ¿Cómo lo hacemos? Llevando a cabo iniciativas lideradas por productores argentinos para impulsar la implementación del sistema de siembra directa y el intercambio de conocimientos a nivel global. Participando activamente en foros y eventos internacionales para posicionar a los productores argentinos, a la asociación y al país como referentes en la producción sustentable, potenciando así el impacto positivo de APRESID a nivel internacional. Para conocer más sobre las acciones de APRESID en el mundo, podés ingresar a nuestra página web y seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales.
Good morning, everyone. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here with you today. Welcome to Quo Vadis. Where are you going? Welcome to this long-awaited moment as part of the APRESID Congress. This marks the closing moments of the 31st edition of APRESID Congress, the Element for Life. That is carbon. This is what you have come to listen to. Through 300 speakers. Quo Vadis was born in the 2008 edition of the Congress. This was a historic year for the agribusiness sector. It was called Quo Vadis Agro. So during that same Congress, we had for the first time the Quo Vadis Argentina segment, which opened the doors to all of society. And this would be followed by other congresses as well as the other Quo Vadis spaces. Today this is the 16th Quo Vadis edition, and because of the elections that will happen next Sunday, we can already vote. We are 16 years old, so we feel really prepared to cast our ballot for a better Argentina. For a better Argentina with regard to the world. I vote for Quo Vadis. I vote for us continuing to approach society from this standpoint. Welcome to the last day of the APRESID and Element for Life edition of APRESID, and to this panel, Quo Vadis. Marcelo Torres is the president of APRESID, and he has the floor now. Well, I have a hoarse voice, so thank you for being here. We are First of all, let's talk about the challenge that is faced by the world and how can we sustain and growing demand and take care of the planet with different perspectives, which are starkly contrasting sometimes on the side of a number of countries. But this is a complex challenge, and we'll see how we tackle it together. A global challenge. It is not a challenge belonging to just one country. Then We will see the opportunity that Argentina has as an industry, agriculture, agribusiness, and then the most complex part maybe, is this a country for everyone if we consider the events that have been happening lately. So there is a significant contrast right here. Here we can see dialogue, people that agree to disagree, and we want to be the protagonists of our own development. But our country is a complicated one. Hopefully, we will have the wisdom and the openness so that this way of experiencing things that we are seeing here will expand, and so that we may approach more and more Argentinians. Hopefully, our Quo Vadis panel will be very fruitful. I do not have much more to say. Thank you for being here. With this round of applause, we express our gratitude to Marcelo on account of the Quo Vadis introduction. We will introduce the panel for this day. First of all, two practical comments. Please put your mobiles on mute so as not to bother the other participants. And another thing is that on the screen, on this huge screen, you will see a QR code with a WhatsApp number. So you will be able to use this QR code to send out your questions for the speakers. The same applies to the people that are watching us online. The questions will get answered at the end of the panel if there is enough time. So please take your seats in the living room that is on the stage. The first topic is agri-food world, climate and society, a challenge that we should think about together. The speakers for this block are Mr. Kruidering, Ms. Parrilla from Brazil, Mr. Lartirigoyen from Argentina, and Carl Bernhagen from Germany. He will be connecting via Zoom. The facilitator will be Manuel Chiappe from the Barbechando Foundation. Good morning. Thank you for being here. It's a huge source of pride. Thank you to APRESID for your invitation. And I think that the title of this panel is quite interesting. Agribusiness world, climate and society. A challenge that we should think about together. So I stick with one part of the title, which is the one that we pay less attention to, which is think, reflect. And I think that this time of the Congress is a moment for us to be able to think about a number of things. Why do we do certain things? How do we recalculate? And how can we have an impact in this very, very complex country we're living, so that from our own standpoint, we may have an influence in the very best way possible in the destiny of our country. My name is Manuel Chiappe. I wear several hats here. I am an environmental engineer. I am also a farmer. I have my farm in the province of Entre Rios, northeast of Argentina. I am also the general director of Barbechando Foundation. This is an NGO that does advocacy with regards to agricultural policies at Congress in Argentina. So coming back to the panel's objective, and with these deluxe speakers that we have with us, and Professor Bernhagen, who is connected via Zoom, we are going to we're going to go from the general to the particular. Professor Bernhagen is going to talk about regulations in the EU with regard to deforestation and agri-food products. Then we will focus a little bit more on the Netherlands, and Singe is going to provide us with an outlook on how the Netherlands is tackling its environmental and sustainable development policies in connection with agri-food. There's a lot that we have seen over the past year. We've seen demonstrations and protests by Dutch farmers, a number of conflicts as well. So I think that it would be great to have her first-hand take on the roots, the origins of all that, and the context, and how the country is moving forward in terms of public policies. And then we will focus on the South Cone. Andrea Parrilla is the agriculture attaché from Brazil in Argentina. She will provide us with an outlook of what Brazil is doing in connection with agriculture and sustainable development, how they're balancing both things. And then we will hear a very successful Argentinian businessman who has decided to stay in the country, investing in the country. He puts his best bets on federalism, Mr. Lartirigoyen. He will talk about their day-to-day work with regards to sustainable development and this connection with social aspects, something that we should really not lose sight of as farmers, businessmen, and leaders of institutions. So let's cut to the chase, and I will now introduce a professor of law at the University of Beirut, Dr. Kai Pernhagen. He is a teacher of food law. He's also Kai works in the areas of law in the EU, international economic law, interdisciplinary comparative analysis of law, and he is the co-author of over 100 books and publications connected with law, natural science, and social science. I think it's a real luxury for us to have Mr. Pernhagen with us, and we will now listen to him and to the knowledge that he has to share with us. So hopefully his Zoom connection and all Zoom connections will work.
And the audience is all yours.
Share this all with you. Sometimes, can you hear me? Is everything fine? Yeah.
Sorry, Kai. Can you start again, please?
Absolutely. So once more, can you hear me? Are we online? Is everything working fine? I had the feeling that you cannot hear me. Is that a possibility? So why don't we just then take a different route? And are you able to hear me?
We have trouble hearing you.
That is really a problem. So maybe we'll just work on these issues, and someone else would start off and kick off first, and we'll try to tackle the issues.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah? Okay.
¿Podemos pasarlo a...?
Yeah, sure. We will have Dr. Pernhagen deliver the second presentation. Singe, so it's your turn now, and you will be followed by your colleague later. I'm looking for the first slide. As has already been said at the beginning, I imagine that you have seen this in the news. We have had a lot of distress on the side of farmers in the Netherlands. I also imagine that you know that we have a new political party which is made up of farmers and citizens from rural areas. What you're seeing right now is that we are at the beginning of a significant transition. You are witnessing the dialogue that is being held with regards to the future that we wish to build. To understand how we have arrived at this point, I think that we should see where we are coming from and recognize the work that was done. After the Second World War, we promised to citizens that they would never go hungry again, and we've built an agricultural system based on productivity, top quality, and low cost. We are the second worldwide exporter of food, and we are also a significant importer of agricultural products. This is a big achievement if we consider that the Netherlands is 67 times smaller than Argentina. These achievements imply a cost as well. Of course, they have their downside. With 1.6 billion heads of cattle, we have a load per hectare that is twice as much as that of Argentina. If to that we add 17.75 million of Dutch people, 2 million pigs, and a similar amount of poultry, I suppose that you will probably understand the emissions that we are sending out in such a small country. We have had an experience fighting against nature, but now we've switched to working with nature. On the two maps, you can see the land that the Netherlands has won over from the sea. In the central area, there is a lot of land that we have won over from the sea. In contrast to this vision of working with nature and also in consideration of climate change, we are starting to give back agricultural land to the sea. And in the other maps, you will take a look at what the Netherlands looks like and what it might look like in the future. This was done by the University of Bahrain, and you can see where we might locate agriculture and how we can rebuild our country. This is a painful process because we need to say goodbye to things that we have built together, and we have restart from scratch again. So the Netherlands is, because of its size, one of the countries that have reached the planetary limits, that is to say, the entire load that our country can bear. So that compels us to work on coherent policies, one agenda, not 3 or 4 agendas at the same time. Right here we can see the SDGs, which are usually viewed differently, but this graph shows the way that we are developing our policies moving forward. This begins at the basis, our nature. We only have one planet, we have to work with it, and we need to give space to biodiversity. The second circle shows society. What type of society do we want to have? How do we add everyone? How do we include everyone? How do we distribute our goods? And finally, economy, which should be coherent and consistent with the objectives I was mentioning before. As I said before, it's no easy thing.
Challenges change, but the way we work in the Netherlands does not. We continue, and although discussions are complicated and we tend to move one step forward, one backwards, but we are convinced that we have to develop that agenda jointly. That means that the government works along with the private sector, including the financial sector, the civil society, NGOs, universities, and research institutes. You are no longer watching tractors in the streets, and I cannot promise that you're not going to see them again, but it's because it's a long process. But we are convinced that we're going to be able to develop a future that is good for all. It's true that challenges are within a context of international regulations, European regulations, and that reduces the space for operations. We are also able to focus the path ahead. This is an example because when APRESID president came to the Netherlands and we talked together during those days, we realized that we have common agendas, projects and works and tasks that are very similar. The adaptation of to the climate change for the agricultural sector, and you see there two maps. Soil care, we have to start off with health soil, and also aquifer systems. And that's a bit the bridge to the last slide as to how we confront the challenges, national and international challenges. This is a common agenda, and it's a great room of opportunity to learn together. And I'm convinced, because I'm inspired by what you're doing here from the private sector in Argentina, the work that you're doing of a focus, of a long-term vision, working in sustainability, the care of the soils, the work you're doing with water, the governance models that we share, as we said, with the connection of soil and water, the example of higher basing, Picasa, where you're working from the private sector, the ecological systems at the service of agriculture, with the Danish embassy in Buenos Aires. We're seeing how we can continue working together in the future to cover these global challenges we have. We are allies in the development of an agenda to share challenges, and I'm sure that together we will be able to develop an agenda that will be profitable and good for us all.
Qué interesante.
So interesting what we've just heard, and I would like to focus on three concepts. The first one is the private-public work along with politicians, with decision makers, with a look ahead, leaving protest aside and taking action. That's the second concept, that to have a strategy like the Danish diamond. There's a plan of looking ahead, and I think that is very important in order to draw as a conclusion and to understand the context where those videos we have seen in the last year of tractors protesting as a civic action, as a political action, that in short we have to learn here from Argentina to follow that path. I think that we have worked out the technical problems, and if we are okay, we will return with Kai, who is going to give us a general context of European legislation in terms of forestry, something that was part of our agenda, which, far from concerning us, we should take care of it, and it should place us in an advantageous position in terms of what's coming ahead. We are not as so bad as we think, and we have an opportunity. Kai?
The problems are solved, and welcome to the APRESID Congress.
I do think that maybe by now, so should be solved. Are we Can you give me no? Hello. Can you give me a signal that we We're still not good. Well, on my side, everything's so far. Maybe I can talk to someone who is taking care of the audio, if that's still an issue. So is it possible to hear me, or we're still facing audio problems? My internet.
We're still having some problem. And
can anyone give me some sort of feedback, please? If you can hear me, are you fine? Are we good? Excellent. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm actually very sorry that I cannot be with you here in person. But furthermore, I would like to enlighten you on what the EU plans in terms of the deforestation strategy. And in particular, I would like to ask the question and maybe answer and maybe later discuss whether the EU deforestation strategy is a paper tiger or actually a breakthrough in saving our planet. Now, some data as a little background for you. So if you look into the previous years, and we look into particular deforestation strategy, the data, the numbers behind it are actually quite interesting. So what we need to do, and that has been identified by the FAO and Rome, is to basically, if we would change policies in terms of our deforestation, we could achieve three different goals. One is we could halt deforestation and therefore avoid, if we continue with our plans, 3.6 to gigatons of carbon dioxide. And that would be 40% of what is needed up to 2030 to keep our planetary warming below the 1.50 percentage degree. Now we could also, if we restore degraded lands and expand agroforestry, we could actually contribute to particularly halting biodiversity loss. And last but not least, and that is most important in the deforestation strategy, if we use existing forests sustainably and build green value chains, we would actually help to meet our future demands for materials, instead for halting supplies. And we could actually respond to double of global consumption of natural resources. So in particular, the latter point is most important background for the regulation of the deforestation in the European Union. Now, what are we actually looking at? We're looking at a regulation 2023-11.5. Now, what is the fact that it's a regulation means that it's directly applicable. So it is law, and it's actually binding law. So each and everyone in the European Union has to apply it from the time it gets into force. Now, the plan of that regulation, the general goals, are to minimize the Union's contribution to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide. That's the first goal. And the second goal is to reduce the Union's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss. Now, as I told you, the regulations are directly applicable from the 29th of June 2023, which means that it is already in the law and it needs to be applied. The theoretical background is the so-called Brussels effect. The European Union has been increasingly aware of the fact that the regulations that it has does not only have a domestic impact inside of the European Union, but also has huge effects outside of the European Union, and so forth, particularly on Argentina, and particularly also on the whole Latin American world, because we do have a lot of trade, particularly in foods, with the Latin American countries. Now, the European Union is increasingly concerned with reducing the negative effects of this process.
Hay preocupaciones con respecto a reducir los efectos negativos del efecto de Bruselas.
And so the deforestation regulation is one aspect of how it wants to reduce these kind of policies. And the major regulatory tools are so-called due diligence requirements. So how to achieve it? It is through respective due diligence requirements. Let me get to these due diligence requirements in the following PowerPoint presentation. So the question is, what is covered by the deforestation legislation? Now, first and foremost, it is a list of respective goods. And these respective goods are only allowed to enter the European Union or be placed on the market of the European Union or exported to the European Union when they are so-called deforestation free. And deforestation free is also defined in the legislation. And that is a good which does not contain, has not been fed or been made using the relative commodities, I'm going to get to that a bit later, that were produced on land not subject to deforestation. So, this is quite a revolutionary step, because now each and every good which is mentioned in the directive has to comply with these due diligence requirements. And if we look at the goods which are listed, it's not just some which are unimportant. So the commodities covered which have to fulfill the due diligence requirements are cattle, cacao, coffee, palm oil, rubber, soy, and wood. And not only these respective raw materials, but all products that are made from these raw materials. So we're expecting quite some impact on the trade and on the European Union and who is allowed to enter the European Union market in the aftermath of this deforestation regulation. Now, what is actually needed in order to enter now the European market or export from the European Union for these kind of goods? I told you it's already a due diligence requirement, is the major regulatory tool. And that means that each operator who would like to place such a product on the market or export it from the European Union needs to file for a due diligence statement with a competent member state authority. So it's each of the member states, there has to be a competent authority dealing with these due diligence requirements. There will be an information system established by the Commission, which will facilitate the information between these respective member state authorities and further clarify what is actually needed to do that. But it's important that it's like a bit like an authorization procedure now for these commodities, who are in charge of respective member state authorities. Now, what is also important to know is the due diligence requirements involves traceability requirements for these kind of products, and which means that the traceability needs to be guaranteed down to the geolocation of all plots of lands of production of these respective products, and also the date or time range of the respective production of this respective product. The European Union, for example, foresees satellite data to be used for this respect, but it has to be possible to trace back for each of these products the whole supply chain until down to the geolocation of this plot of lands of production. Now, if we go a bit further and look into the due diligence requirement that's actually required now, it is a so-called 3 steps due diligence procedure. So you need to collect detailed information that demonstrates that the product complies with the regulation. There has to be a risk assessment for each product to assess the risk of non-compliance with the regulation, and risk mitigation measures need to be in place by the operator. It has to conduct surveys, gather additional documentation, work with suppliers, and consult, for example, satellite data to be able to trace back the respective location of the respective product. Now let's look a bit further closely into the risk assessment that is actually needed from now on. So, a part of risk assessment is also that the operator has to make certain that the product was produced in accordance with the relevant local laws. This is quite new because by that the European Union is becoming an enforcement authority for laws outside of its own territory. It has also to make certain that the products are produced with express support for the principle of free, prior, and firm consent of indigenous peoples. And last but not least, it has to be 14 criteria for risk assessment, which are drawn up by the regulation, and you can consult the regulation. I've listed some important aspects. So first and foremost, those criteria have to comply with the risk classification system from the Commission, which is actually drawn up by the Commission. The Commission classifies countries in 3 categories with low and high risks of non-compliance. And depending on where the product is sourced, you need more risk assessment mechanisms or less risk assessment measures. Now, the presence of forest land in the area of production, how much is there, how much is actually needed. You'll have to provide good faith engagements with the indigenous populations, duly reasoned claims of ownership by indigenous peoples, concerns regarding corruption or human rights violations, and complexity of supply chains and the risk of mixing and circumvention of respective rules. So they all have to be part of the risk assessment, which needs to be submitted to the competent authority. Now, if you don't do this, and if you fail to comply with such a due diligence requirements, there are several enforcement measures in place. So the competent national authorities, for example, are obliged to check frequently, and they check randomly and without prior notice whether the respective companies comply with the due diligence requirements. Now, the Commission draws also a framework plan, control plan for all national authorities to ensure that there's a bit of coherency between the respective authorizations, enforcement agencies. They need to check following on a risk-based approach. So the higher the risk of non-compliance, the more frequent the checks need to be. There's an obligation to draw national plans to identify risk criteria. Of course, they need to comply with the Commission framework control plan. And also, where following the risk-based approach, where products present higher risks, the respective national authorities can do interim measures to prevent entering into the market. But they cannot only use interim measures. They can also use corrective measures. So competent authorities in terms of non-compliance are obliged, or they have the possibility, in some areas they are obliged, to take any formal non-compliance measures. So they can sanction anything which is effective and proportionate. They can, for example, provide a ban on the item that's being sold in the EU or exported. They can initiate immediate withdrawal or recall obligation of the item. And they can also order the respective company to donate these products to charity or public interest or dispose the product. So these enforcement measures, corrective measures, are quite wide-ranging in terms of non-compliance of the respective due diligence requirements. But not only corrective measures can be in place, but it can also be fines. So the respective competent authorities can initiate fines, and they have to resemble at least 4% of the union turnover of the product in the preceding year. But that's the minimum still. So it can be more. So it has to be something that actually, in plain terms, hurt the producer. It can also confiscate the product, and it can confiscate also all the revenue gains of the respective company. It can temporarily exclude the company from public procurement processes, and if there's serious and repeated infringements, it can be a temporary prohibition from dealing with those items. When calculating the fines, it also has to be taken into account if there's serious and or repeated infringements. For a repeated infringement, the fines always have to increase, and as a rule of thumb, the Commission has initiated that they shall actually double each time. Now, is that actually all doing the job? Does it actually help to create more sustainable supply chains? Well, the discussion has just started. So there's a lot of people that say, well, there's a lot of red tape instead of real action, because if you look on the ground, what can authorities actually check? They can only check the they can only initiate a formal check to look at the documents at home to see whether they're compliant. No authority will actually fly to the ground and see whether this is actually, in line with what happens elsewhere. So there's some people who argue, well, this will only be a red tape, and it's a big, money-making machine for attorneys, and wouldn't actually help at all. Some say, well, it's just for this reason, it's just a formalization of procedures, and it's not real check-in is not possible. That's all that actually matters. Some also say in the criticism that the framework, well, as long as the European Union, was more or less the biggest Europe market in the world, this has been the right approach. But we face so many competition, particularly now from other growing economies, that the foregoing of the EU market, when regulation gets stricter, it's getting even more, it's now getting more possible for companies. So is the European Union still, let's say, strong enough as a partner to really have such costly and dense regulations in place? And last but not least, the criticism concerns, does the European Union is it actually possible to do that? Do they have the powers to do that? Or is it legally, are they overstepping the limits? What is legally possible? And we have to discuss this and more with you on the panel and later on. And thank you very much for your input.
Thank you very much, Kai. Very interesting your presentation. Antes de que los productores de soja.
Before soybean producer and livestock farmers panic, let me tell you that in Argentina, since 2018, we have regulation of protection of native forests, conservation, etc., that is regulated in most provinces of native forests in Argentina, where we do agricultural production. So we have an advantage of over 10 years working in the question of deforestation. A word Kai was mentioning was traceability, and I think there lies a big part of our challenge as producers, to be able to trace what is beef and soybean and their byproducts, as to how all was produced throughout the years. For that purpose, there are tools many institutions are implementing in our country, such as the BISEC, which is the sectorial vision of the Gran Chaco, which is a geographical monitoring tool to trace the production of soybean, but making sure they are not coming from deforested lands in Gran Chaco. The chain of beef is adopting the same traceability, and the future, more than panicking about it or having fear, is focusing on how we can make progress and focus on this.
Presentations, and then we're gonna come back with some questions for sure. Vamos a pasar a nuestra tercera.
Next, we will have our next panelist, and let's give Kai a warm round of applause.
Vamos a pasar a nuestra tercer panelista.
Our third panelist is here to my left. She's Andrea Parrilla. She's from Brazil. She's a technician from the University of the Faculty of Agriculture and Livestock School, with a specialization in agribusiness from Brazilian University, and she has been working as a fiscal or auditor in agriculture. She was a general coordinator of regulation and regulation intellectual property at the OECD. She was also in charge of free trade agreements between Brazil, Chile, Mercosur, European Union, Mercosur, Singapore, Canada, South Korea. It's a pleasure to have her here with us today. She's currently part of the she's agricultural attaché for Brazil, and so thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to participate as a speaker here today and to be able to speak a little bit about the promotion policies in sustainable agriculture in such an important Congress as APRESID. So thank you very much for this possibility. I'm Andrea Parrilla, and I am agricultural attaché at the Brazilian Embassy in Buenos Aires in Argentina. I would like to go back to Brazil history. 50 years ago, Brazil was a great importer of food in the world, of basic foods, and it suffered from food insecurity. So we needed their lands to become productive, which meant a challenge for the tropical regions. So from 1970 to 1990, there was a great investment in science and technology on the part of the government, so that the tropicalization and the development of vegetable varieties and animal races were allowed, and that technology allowed the transformation of acid soils and poor soils in Brazil into fertile lands.
This is a country that responds to the demands of the Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil for the new development of technologies for agriculture and livestock raising. As you can see on the map, you can see that this cuts across Brazil. It has 43 research centers distributed across the country, almost 8,000 employees. Out of these, a little bit more than 2,000 are researchers, and 90% of them are doctors.
We also have an international presence that is very important. There are virtual labs of Embrapa abroad with over 150 research projects in more than 40 countries. Apart from this, between 2000 and 2020, we rose awareness in Brazil in terms of fostering environmental development so as to have a more intensive agricultural production with a sustainable and environmental awareness. And there, Brazilian government, coordinated by the Agricultural Ministry of Brazil, launched the program called low-carbon agriculture to uphold this sustainable intensification. This program was based in the integration, the recovery of degraded pastures, irrigation, planted forests, the integration, the agricultural, livestock, and forestry integration, the no-till systems, intensive creation, biosupplies, and the reuse of waste, animal waste. This is called the ABC plan, low-carbon agriculture plan. The first stage was the launching a plan of 10-year plan, and it was possible throughout those 2 years the mitigation of 993 millions of carbon dioxide and its equivalent. And 26.8 million hectares of pastures were recovered. More than 10 million hectares of integration systems were added, and almost 15 million hectares were used for no-till agriculture. Almost 2 million hectares of forests were planted. 11.8 million hectares were used for the biological fixation of nitrogen, and 38.3 cubic meters of waste the treatment of animal waste. Through the graph, you can clearly see the evolution of the agricultural systems in Brazil between 2005 and 2020. In 2005, we had a bit more than 2 million hectares, and by 2020, we now have almost 20 million hectares under the agricultural and livestock and forestry systems that focuses on the intensification of the agricultural production with an environmental mindset, the mitigation of methane gas, water preservation, and land savings. You don't need to open up new lands, so we are saving soil, land. This slide is very important that I like including because in 5 decades, Brazil went from food insecurity to become one of the biggest sustainable food exporters in the world, and which was the consequence in the economic development of Brazil and social development, mainly social development. The population had access to good quality food at low price. So the result of this was the reduction of over 40% of the basic basket of commodities. So low-income families have access to good quality products because grain production in Brazil increased 6 times. Wheat and corn productivity increased by 240%. Rice productivity increased by 315%. Forestal sector increased its productivity by 140%. The bovine cattle was doubled, and poultry production increased almost 60 times. Agribusiness as an economic and social driver include certain policies. These policies are state policies. They do not change with every administration. They are sustainable policies. Although governments or administrations have changed, we have the Safra plan, the sugarcane sector, which is for agriculture and livestock. And we talked about the next season. And this Safra plan, or the sugarcane sector plan, was based on sustainable practices for agriculture and livestock with the mitigation of GHG gases and the adoption of sustainable agricultural practices. We have a very important state policy called PAA, which is the Program of Food Acquisition for Family Agriculture with a value on biodiversity and organic production and agroecologic production of food. The policy commits to purchase from smallholders, family smallholders, so that they can take the food to public schools in Brazil, and those can feed children of Brazil. What do we expect from agriculture in Brazil? We have a challenge that with the increase in the world, there are almost 1 billion people in the world by 2050, and we need to increase by 60% the amount of food, and by 2050 Brazil should reach carbon neutrality. And climate change. what happens with food production and climate change. It is a very important topic for Brazil because the effect of climate change can limit the production. Of course, Brazil, with the reduction of productivity and the reduction of arable land, we see an impact. So we see there a graph of what can happen with an increase of temperature and the rain variability. That's why we launched this year the ABC Plus plan, which is to have an awareness of climate change. Thus, low carbon agricultural plan enters a second phase from 2021 to 2030 to mitigate 1 gigaton of carbon. With this, the aim of recovering more than 30 million hectares, broaden the areas for no-till systems which are 12 million hectares, and the integration of systems, and plus more than 4 million of forests planted. And this policy is based on environmental compliance, rural credit and financial instruments, that is to say, to make and to enable an easier access to credit, acknowledgement and compensations for producers under these systems, environmental compliance, applied research and technical assistance, and verification. And here, very quickly, we will talk about the legal framework, environmental legal framework in Brazil, which is one of the most rigid in the world. It is mandatory in Brazil throughout Brazil for all rural facilities to have 80% of their properties, rural facilities, to be preserved. 35% for Cerrado, and for other regions 20% with the fiscalization of the government. And here we see what is already being produced under neutral carbon systems. So we have livestock products or beef products with this certification, and also soybean, that is low carbon production. This is the greener carbon program. So acknowledge compliance and credibility acknowledge. The new world demands in environmental products in terms of food productions. There are many initiatives and sustainable practices that are similar in South America. It is important that these practices are acknowledged by importing countries, so that there's a higher payment for this environmental added value. So it's important to have a coordination among southern countries in just fora as the Mercosur, CAS, GPS, and also COPs. And I would like to highlight that the southern countries that are working toward the new environmental demands should also have the same environmental demands when we import foods or industrialized foods that we import from third-party countries. So to export and import more sustainable foods. Thank you very much. I'm open to questions.
Muchísimas gracias, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We are coming to the close of this panel. I would like to share some public policies that go well beyond the different administrations. This is something to be envied from the Brazilian people because they are very pragmatic when they launch a plan and they are able to measure them. The low carbon agriculture is being executed since 2010 with the specific actions, and this is something to imitate. And I would like to close with a small anecdote.
Well, during the time of ballotage between Bolsonaro and Lula, we asked someone, who would you like to win? He says it's exactly the same thing, because the road that Brazil is going to take for its agricultural policy will be the same one, with just a few minor details, whether it is Lula or Bolsonaro that win. I think that this is something that we need to learn for this interaction between the public and the private sector, so as to have proper development for our country. So we are drawing towards the close of our panel. Ignacio Lartirigoyen is the co-founder of Lartirigoyen y Compañía. It has been, this is a company with over 20 years of age. It distributes grain, provides inputs, as well as other agricultural services. Ignacio, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Tell us how Lartirigoyen is embracing this path forward and how you have been working over the years. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Can I speak sitting down? Yeah, sure you can. Well, I'm last after these amazing presentations. I think that we might open a branch in Brazil. Why not? Lartirigoyen y Compañía is a company which, even though 40% of the company belongs to a multinational called Miterra, it's actually a national company that performs its activity 100% in Argentina. We are a group of companies that in total sum up 12K people. We got started in 1986. Let me share the context of our company, and as part of that group, we have different business units ranging from production to commercial business. We devote ourselves to trading grain, around 3 million tons worth of grain, as well as agricultural inputs. And we are purchasers and sellers. We also produce livestock, bovine livestock and porcine livestock. So we are present in the entire agri-business chain. Apart from that, we have investments on different industries, such as a mill. We have a mill called Tassara. We have an agrochemicals plant. We also have a biodiesel plant called Pampa Bio. So we are present at Sitio Cero, which is a part of a port, and we also have minor investments in a range of companies that add value from different perspectives. We are not too significant in terms of the investments that we make for these companies, but this generates knowledge for us, and well, it is knowledge that we can apply to the rest of our chain. Our pillars are the following. We basically base ourselves upon 4 pillars: people, sustainability, innovation, and communication. So I will make reference exclusively to what we are doing in the case of sustainability and how we are embracing all of that. I'm so happy about having heard the other speakers today, as well as the demands that will come up moving forward, because I think that we are preparing quite well. And as Argentinians, we are highly versatile and so resilient. This is true of Argentinian farmers, and we are going to do whatever we undertake, we are going to do well despite all the regulations that we may have to deal with moving forward. I think that that needs to motivate us and not be a matter of concern, because we are prepared, or we are getting prepared quite well. So when it comes to sustainability, so there are two sides to sustainability for us. Like, for example, carbon management, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. So we do not necessarily measure everything in the same way. We live in a country which experiences lots of problems, not only the environment, we have social problems, societal problems. We have an interior that demands a lot of people to work there, and urban centers that are saturated with people. There is an overpopulation right there, so we feel that with agribusiness we need to pay lots of taxes to make up for that. So one thing that we need to attain is migration from urban centers to the interior, to the countryside, and for that we need to work together. That is why our work is strongly oriented towards that. With regards to carbon management, 2 years ago we measured our sea emissions from all the company's activities. We did that as a starting point so as to know where we were standing. We did that, and we also did our entire management. We have 11 farms that we rent with around 20,000 heads of cattle in production, and we measured the balance of these farms, both with regards to emissions and with regards to sequestration, thanks to the pastures where the cattle graze. And the results have been quite surprising for us, because we realize that we are doing a lot better than we believe we did in connection with emissions. So we've measured that, we've measured the entire carbon production, and we are performing trials with Bayer. For example, we are performing a trial on different production systems and how the footprint behaves across different systems. We are with our own seeders, with the Puma platform, with Viterra and other companies. We reached with Agrology and Viterra. We were able to manage 500k hectares where we measured our carbon footprint for the crops. That means that we are working, and I think that we are well, and we are on just the right path with regards to plastic management, which is another aspect. 3 to 4 years ago, La Pampa closed down its marketing sector for agrochemicals because waste was not properly treated. First, we got angry, but then we said, okay, we need to be part of the solution. So we decided to work together with Campo Limpio and the province. Right now, we have a center for bottle conditioning. We have a center where we compact the packs so as to reduce the carbon footprint when we need to transport these plastic waste. So we are becoming leaders on that, together with our farmers and together with the people that are in the area. And then with regards to social sustainability, we have seen that kids, even in the provinces, they think that agriculture is only about soybeans and agrochemicals, agrotoxic chemicals. So that's what people tend to believe. That's the bias that youngsters have. So we created this event called L'Arte Innova, where we invite kids in the 5th year of high school to show them 12 agriculture startups. They spend an entire day checking out different alternatives and showing them how, based on technology, agriculture is not just about planting seeds, but it's about lots of many other things. It's about opportunities, and several guys there were several kids that they decided to pursue another profession after attending our event. So we are intensifying that together with other projects. So over 3K kids have gone through this program. That's another program called Agroposta. It's the same thing that we are doing, but in the district of Trenquelauquen. And once we were with leaders, we spent some time with leaders from an organization called La Popular from underprivileged neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, and the kids said, they said, oh, well, people tend to think that farmers keep the dollars to themselves, and that is why the country is doing so badly. So I invited him to familiarize himself with agriculture and with the real thing. So, well, we try to bring together two worlds that are entirely apart and which do not know one another. And in Argentina, Argentina is a country that we need to build together. So I think that sustainability has to do with that. Apart from that, with regards to inclusion, we have programs with people with disabilities that working with our companies, and we are growing along those lines. We have another program which has to do with giving jobs to inmates who are released from prison, and lots of social activities that we perform so as to contribute to chip in connection with education and fighting extreme poverty. And with regards to energy sustainability, what we are starting to do is that some of our offices are starting to get fed with solar. So right now we are about to open a logistics center which is going to have a green building certification. I can't remember what this is about. The green building certification means that everything is prepared so it is more environmentally friendly. Energy will be fed from solar panels. The entire logistics center will be fitted with LED lamps. There are going to be windows to allow sunlight to come through. So this is going to be a large space for stocking seeds, agrochemicals, and bags, of which right now we have 3,700 pallets that are completely automated. No, there are no humans in this place. So we are going to robotize this entire technology. We are going to use QR codes, fire detectors, security. So this is a system called Building Management Systems. And for example, if there is someone in a room and the air conditioner is on and that person leaves the room and the room is left empty, the AC goes off. So everything is automated. So this green building certification is going to be to make us the first agricultural company to have received this certification, and all of our actions moving forward, we are considering them with the goal of being more environmentally friendly. I'm probably forgetting about lots of things. Well, but that is what I wanted to share with you. Okay, thank you to this deluxe panel. I was taking a look at the speakers from the next panel. We are being told that we are way behind schedule, so we would have loved to take questions, but we need to be respectful to Diana Mondino and the other members of the next panel. We are going to step out of the stage. And, well, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to the panelists and to Professor Kai, who's connected via Zoom. And coming back to the title of the panel, and in closing, agribusiness, world climate and society, a challenge that merits joint reflection. So let's leave this panel reflecting on some of the concepts that we've seen. We came in with a bleak perspective of what restrictive regulations might imply connected with the environment, and we are leaving this panel energized with examples, concrete cases, visions, national visions, visions of businessmen that want to get better day by day. And I think that that's a message that we should take home, and we should never let fear paralyze us. So, well, thank you. Let's have it for the speakers, and thank you to Apresid. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Manuel Chiappe, because it was really wonderful to listen to your conclusions and comments. As Manuel was saying, we want to jump ahead of time because we are way behind schedule in this room. Just a number of fundamental points. The long term is something that was key for both Brazil and the Netherlands. And the truth is that a change in administration should not stand in the way of objectives that have already been fixed. We also listened to Professor Kai from the US talking about Europe and the regulations, but of course we should never ignore what has already been achieved, and we should consider that our importers need to understand that we have walked a specific path which we can develop further for better environmental sustainability that has to do with what we have done and what we can do. So this has been observed in this panel with the example of Mr. Lartirigoyen. And I keep what Ignacio just said for the next panel. It has to do with this project of decompressing cities, especially the city of Buenos Aires, and going into the countryside. We will have the last panel on migratory aspects, but migration needs to go from the large cities to the interior, where people really need to get jobs and where we have potential for development.
Producir, crecer, compartir es el accionar de AFA, Agricultores Federados Argentinos, nuestra cooperativa. Es hora de revalorizar lo hecho y celebrar el camino recorrido. AFA, un mundo de 90 años, hecho entre todos, todos los días.
Precision Planting comenzó con una visión de mejorar la agricultura, desarrollando productos innovadores que puedan mejorar el desempeño de tus equipos y al mismo tiempo el rendimiento de tus cultivos.